over in London on Tuesday, the High Court of England and Wales concluded a 3-day hearing to consider Palestinian activist Huda Amouri's legal effort to unban Palestine Action, the group that she co-founded in 2020. This past summer, of course, Palestine Action was banned by Britain's Labour government as a supposed terrorist organisation. Now, when the Labour government came to power last year, half of the cabinet had been funded by pro-Israel lobbyists, according to this report by Declassified UK. The latest news is that shortly before Amouri's application for a judicial review of the ban came before the High Court last week, the judge on the case, a respected expert on free speech law Martin Chamberlain, was abruptly removed from the case without any explanation. Campaigners alleged a stitch-up, and it's quite easy to see why. In this article, you can see on screen here that I wrote, "Judge in Palestine Action case has ties to Israel lobby," that came out last week. I showed how Justice Victoria Sharp, the leading judge on the panel that replaced Chamberlain, has some quite deep historical and current ties to the pro-Israel lobby. First of all, her twin brother, Richard Sharp, the man in the middle of this photo, sits on the board of trustees of a charity alongside Trevor Chin, the man on the right of the photo. Trevor Chin is a leading pro-Israel lobbyist in the UK who has funded many MPs and ministers, including Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself, and who earlier this year was awarded the Medal of Honor by Israeli President Isaac Herzog himself for services to Israel. Chin is a retired auto industry tycoon who used his immense wealth to fund many Israel lobby groups over the years, including Labour Friends of Israel, which is a front group for the Israeli embassy. Here's Trevor Chin at a Labour Friends of Israel event in 2013.
Terms, I now work with CVC, the largest private equity firm in Europe. I spent my entire life working for Israel, for a better image for Israel, for success for Israel, and getting people like this involved with Israel. So the visit was a real eye-opener.
Thanks, Tamara. I spent my entire life working for Israel and for its image and its success, he said. Now, Richard Sharp, who is the chair of the board of that charity that Chin also sits on, is the former chairman of the BBC, and he also happens to be the twin brother of the leading judge on the Palestine Action unbanning case. Richard Sharp had to step down from his influential BBC position in 2023 after breaking the rules on public appointments by failing to declare his connection to a $1 million loan made to Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister of Britain at the time of Sharp's appointment. An investigation had found a, quote, potential perceived conflict of interest. His twin sister Victoria Sharp, who's judging this case, has made no such recusal from deciding on Palestine Action's challenge to the government ban. In any other circumstance aside from one related to Palestine, you can easily imagine that even the appearance of a conflict of interest should have been enough for Justice Sharp to step aside. But unfortunately for the Israelified British government and the increasing Israelified British judicial system, it seems that the actual goal was to create a direct conflict of interest in order to stitch up this case in favour of Israel. The State of Israel has been lobbying successive British governments for the last 5 years to ban Palestine Action. And this is for a good reason, because the group successfully used direct action to target the UK arms factories owned by Elbit Systems, Israel's most deadly drone manufacturer. It did this so successfully that no less than 4 Elbit sites have been closed down as a result of Palestine Action's campaigns over the last 5 years. But a family linked to Trevor Chin is not Victoria Sharp's only connection to the Israel lobby. In the late 1980s, before she was a judge, she reportedly worked as one of 4 principal advisors to Rupert Murdoch, the media tycoon who later turned out to be an Israeli spy. This is him on screen here with his youngest daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. As a barrister acting on instruction from the pro-Israel law firm Mishkon Dereya, Victoria Sharp represented Robert Maxwell in a series of lawsuits against the author and journalist Tom Bauer, who wrote a critical biography of Robert Maxwell. Maxwell even, according to Bauer, paid a private detective to spy on him. The author wrote in a later book that, quote, 4 lawyers were Maxwell's principal advisors. Lord Victor Mishkon and Anthony Julius were his solicitors, and Richard Rampton QC and Victoria Sharp were their barristers. During their frequent court appearances, they betrayed not a hint of doubt about their client's virtues. On the contrary, they pursued his mission with depressing vigour, commitment, and pitilessness. End of quote. Now, Mishkon Dereya later represented the Israeli embassy and Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in a case against the independent newspaper over this cartoon you can see on screen here, which satirized Ariel Sharon's deadly attack on Gaza City 3 days before the Israeli election in 2003, and how little times have changed. Anthony Julius, who is now the deputy chairman of the firm, claimed that this was an anti-Semitic blood libel. Britain's Press Complaints Commission cleared the cartoonist and the newspaper of anti-Semitism, noting that, quote, the cartoonist included the words "after Goya" at the bottom of the cartoon, a reference to Francisco Goya's painting Satan devouring one of his children, to which the cartoon alluded. Julius and his firm have since pursued other cases against critics of Israel, including the 2013 tribunal against the University and College Union, which alleged the union was, quote, institutionally anti-Semitic, for merely debating the possibility of a boycott of Israeli academia. The case was ultimately thrown out on all grounds as an impermissible attempt to achieve a political end by litigious means, was how the judge put it. But a similar strategy of weaponizing anti-Semitism was deployed only a few years later against the Labour Party under its left-wing leader Jeremy Corbyn. Mishkon also acted during that campaign on behalf of Margaret Hodge, the pro-Israel lawmaker who was one of Corbyn's harshest critics within the Labour Party, who falsely accused him of being a effing anti-Semite and a racist. Speaking about the curious new choice of judge on the Palestine Action case, Tayyip Ali from the Bindman's law firm told The Guardian that a sudden and unexplained shift from the single judge who already had conduct of the Palestine Action case to an entirely new panel of 3 is deeply concerning, particularly without any stated justification. A spokesperson for activist group Defend Our Juries, which has been campaigning against the ban on Palestine Action, said in a statement that the replacement makes it hard not to draw the conclusion that this is a stitch-up. The judiciary is meant to be independent of political interference, yet with no transparency around this decision, public confidence is being seriously undermined. That 2 of the replacement judges have links which at least raise the appearance of a conflict of interest only deepens these concerns. Victoria Sharp's past work for Robert Maxwell is of concern for important historical reasons. Maxwell, who died in mysterious circumstances in 1991, was later reported to have been a spy for Israel. After he was found dead at sea, Maxwell was buried in Jerusalem at an extraordinary state funeral ordered by Prime Minister 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, according to authors Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon in their book The Assassination of Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy. He has done more for Israel than can be said here today, the opposition leader and previous Prime Minister Shimon Peres said at the funeral. Thomas, in his other book, Gideon's Spies, wrote that, quote, no fewer than 6 serving and former heads of the Israeli intelligence community attended the funeral. Thomas described Maxwell as Israel's super spy. In his eulogy, Chaim Herzog, then Israel's president, praised Maxwell's aid for the security of our country, was how he put it. Now, on Tuesday, the hearings in the High Court about the ban on Palestine Action concluded. We're unlikely to hear a verdict before the new year. In a statement yesterday, Huda Amori said, the government's presentations in court have made clear the ban rests solely on property damage, not violence, actions we took to prevent harm by disrupting the flow of arms being used to kill Palestinian people. The government offered no justification for refusing to consult those of us whose rights this ban strips away, while admitting they did consult the Israeli embassy, pro-Israel groups, and weapons manufacturers like Elbit, with Starmer even discussing the prescription with Donald Trump. My legal team presented an open and shut case that this prescription amounts to discrimination, and the government provided no answer to the prima facie evidence put before the court. This includes evidence that its own advisers warned at the time that prescribing Palestine Action would raise serious questions about why it was not banning other direct action groups using similar tactics, such as Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. Meanwhile, 6 political prisoners associated with Palestine Action, charged over allegations relating to offences which took place before the ban, have been on hunger strike for about a month. Due to the bogus terror link, quote unquote, which they were smeared with even before the ban went into action, many of them have been held in remand awaiting trial for far longer than the maximum normally allowed period of 6 months on remand. They are on the protest calling for their release on bail and the end of what they say amounts to political persecution by the British government. And you can see on screen here this standalone podcast episode that we released yesterday. We interviewed the sister of one of the hunger strikers, Cameron Ahmed, alongside Francesca Nadine, a former Palestine Action political prisoner. So go and check that out on YouTube or on the front page of electronicintifada.net after the live stream to learn more about the hunger strikers. All of this comes in the context of new plans announced recently by the Labour government's Justice Minister, David Lammy, who is also in hoc to Israel lobbyists and has also been funded by Trevor Chin. Lammy details his plans of a so-called reform of the justice system, which critics say could be the beginning of the end to the ancient right of trial by jury in Britain. According to Sky News, under the most recent version of Lammy's plans, as many as 3/4 of trials that would have been decided by juries will now instead be transferred to judges or magistrates if the reform becomes law. Israelification of British institutions continues apace. Even part of the government's evidence against Palestine Action this week was held in secret hearing. Amori was not permitted to see the allegations presented in this secret hearing due to the so-called closed material procedure, something which sounds quite similar to the so-called secret evidence which is routinely used in Israel's kangaroo system of military courts, which is deployed against Palestinians and not against Jews, and has a conviction rate of some 99.7%. But it's not all bad news in the UK. There have been several important and hard-fought recent legal victories won by activists and campaigners. On Tuesday, the Jersey-based solidarity activist Natalie Strecker was cleared of terrorism charges in a case which local media followed on its front pages and reported as a landmark trial. Strecker has been involved with the solidarity movement for many years in Jersey, has visited the Gaza Strip twice. Jersey is the largest of the British-ruled Channel Islands, which are off the coast of northern France. She was charged with inviting support for a prescribed terrorist group after she posted on social media that Palestinians have the right to resistance under international law. The UK government reportedly trawled through some 50,000 of her posts and sent a prosecutor from the mainland to pursue Strecker, even though the island has its own legal system. The trial descended into farce at times. I talked to Strecker yesterday. She told me that 20 minutes of the prosecution's case in court was spent reading out the entirety of this 2021 article by the Electronic Intifada's own Ali Abu Nama, titled "It's Time to Change Liberal Discourse About Hamas." Now, the disturbing part about this is that Strecker had shared it with just a few of her friends on a private group chat, and those messages had been extracted from her phone by police who trawled the messages and the fact that she shared this article. The case, as I said, Natalie was acquitted of, supporting terrorism. So it was an important victory in that sense, but it should never have been brought in the first place. And dangers remain that similar cases could again be brought to court by the British regime. In a second case, this one on the English mainland earlier this month, the journalist Greg Hadfield was cleared in a Brighton court of allegations of harassment and obscenity over reporting he did at the start of this year, exposing the activities of Ivor Kaplan, a former Labour government minister and a pro-Israel lobbyist. Now, Ivor Kaplan was arrested by police in January on suspicion of engaging in sexual communications with a child. The arrest was caught on camera after a sting operation launched by a volunteer group of paedophile hunters, one of whom had posed over the phone as a 15-year-old boy. Yet, Kaplan was released soon after and still seems not to have been charged with any crime. His bail has been repeatedly extended over the last year, most recently last month, and he was actually released under investigation rather than a new bail in this most recent release. In fact, the only person charged with anything connected to Kaplan's alleged wrongdoing was Hadfield, the very journalist who had sought to draw attention to it. Hadfield was pursued by prosecutors after he had attempted to draw attention to Kaplan's increasingly disturbing public activities, apparently on the instigation of local anti-Palestinian activist Fiona Sharp of the Israeli government-linked group Sussex Friends of Israel. In between promoting his mainstream media appearances and commenting on Labour Party politics, Kaplan openly and repeatedly posted graphic sexual material on his Twitter/X timeline over the course of some months. I used to follow him on X at the time, and it was so bad that initially I assumed that he had been hacked, but he hadn't. It was a screenshot of one of these posts that Hadfield had reposted to X at the same time as asking Fiona Sharp, one of Kaplan's pro-Israel associates in Brighton, why she hadn't said anything to stop Kaplan. And some very high-profile people, by the way, used to interact with Kaplan on Twitter quite regularly, including people now in the British government. At Brighton Magistrates Court last month, the judge ruled that Hadfield had been whistleblowing and frustrated by the inaction of other parties and bringing the information to a more public platform. So it's good that Greg was acquitted of the charges, but again, this is another prosecution that should never have been brought. Kaplan was formerly a leading official in both the Jewish Labour movement and in the Labour Friends of Israel. This photo is from a Labour Friends of Israel event at Labour Party conference a few years ago. And you can see him here with several leading lights of the pro-Israel lobby, including Wes Streeting, current government health minister. So an official in both Jewish Labour Movement and Labour Friends of Israel, which are two lobby groups within the ruling party of government that are both closely tied to the Israeli embassy in London. Now, for the final recent legal victory that I want to mention today, we're going to return to my homeland of Wales to congratulate 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜𝐿 and Asa Winstanley, who you can see on the screen here, whose convictions for whose conviction for harassment was overturned at Cardiff Magistrates Court 2 weeks ago. Ahmed and Behit were disgracefully pursued through the courts for 16 months by their local Labour lawmaker for Pontypridd, Alex Davies-Jones, who you're about to see in this exclusive video. She's now a minister at the Ministry of Justice, of all places. In this video, playing silently, it's an EI exclusive, it's never been shown in full before. It's the full interaction which proves the pair's innocence and appears to show that Alex Davies-Jones lied about being harassed. You can see from this video that her and her team approached the two activists, not the other way around. Davies-Jones, a parliamentary supporter of Labour Friends of Israel, had approached the pair during last year's general election while they were passing out a flyer in their local area, raising awareness of her complicity in the Gaza genocide. A clip of part of the interaction went viral online, but within 3 hours of posting the video, the pair were raided and arrested by South Wales police, and then pursued through the courts through over the course of nearly a year and a half. Now, I'm told that Davis Jones has family or associates in the police in South Wales, so whether or not that played a role in this effectively state harassment remains to be seen, but I think it's likely. In my view, the Labour MP claimed during the court case that her constituents holding her to account for her pro-genocide actions was scary and that they had harassed her. But she failed to mention the fact that it was her who had approached the pair in the first place. As you can see from the video, she doesn't look remotely scared. The court disagreed with the MP and the activist's convictions were overturned. Again, an important victory, but a case that should never have been brought in the first place. Are all these more recent victories hopeful signs for the Palestine Action unbanning? Or has the British political establishment and the Israel lobby already made the outcome of that case a foregone conclusion? Only time will tell. We'll be following developments closely, and you can read more about Victoria Sharp and Rupert Maxwell in my piece currently on the front page of our site at electronicintifada.net, so go and check that out there.